So I'm really excited for today. We have some amazing panelists and some amazing discussions that we're going to be spoken about today. Today is really, really important because it's about trying to speak about these really important issues from a young person's perspective, but also start to come together and actually create some solutions, because as a lot of you probably could agree, our current education system has proven to highlight a few flaws, and I say a few in a really optimistic way. There are quite a few flaws that have been highlighted within our education system, and as young people we're frustrated, and I'm all about trying to channel that frustration in a positive way and come together. That's what Pupil Power is all about. So thank you so much for joining us. Our first panel is on mental health in the UK education system, and I'm going to bring everybody on to speak. So this is our host, Theo. So everybody say hey to Theo. Hey, Theo.
Hello. Hi, Elia. You got a camera on?
Yes.
Hey. Okay, and then we've also got Atia, who I'm going to promote as panelist. Say hey, Atia.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, hey, hey. We've got Dylan.
Hey.
And I'm just double checking because I have to go through all the attendees to make sure that I've not missed anyone. We also had Hamad, which I'm not sure if he's joined yet, which is completely fine. And we have, yeah, okay, cool. How's everyone?
Good.
Yeah, really well, thanks, Elia.
I'm going to hand it over to Theo. Take it away.
Cool, thank you so much. Elia, how long do we have? I'm super excited to talk for ages.
About 20 minutes, I think.
Okay, no worries. Hi, can everyone hear me? Can all the panelists with me? So hopefully today we'll be joined by Dylan. Dylan, are you there?
Yep. Can you hear me? Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Brilliant, sorry. I'm not sure, my thing's getting really quiet. Thanks, Dylan, nice to see you. And Hamad is meant to be joining us. I'm not sure if he's here today, but also we'll be joined by Elia's also here. Hi, Elia. I don't know whether it's my speakers, but I can't hear too well. Let me try something. So sorry about this. Okay. If everyone says hey, and I might be able to hear you.
Hey.
Hi.
Okay, that's better. Super stoked. I can finally hear you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really nice. And I know you two especially have a really big interest in the topic. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions around the past, the present, and the future, and how that has affected mental health current situation. So is everyone raring to go?
Yep.
Brilliant. Okay. So the first question: what would you say is the current state? I'll start with Leah, of the mental health pandemic in the United Kingdom right now. So yeah.
Is that for me?
Yeah, that's for you.
Yeah. I think the current situation of the mental health for the youth isn't actually very good at the moment. You can clearly see that, like, especially during the pandemic, I think a lot of young people are struggling. I feel like maybe people think that they don't have a lot of people to speak to, whether it be at school or like in terms of family, and especially even with friends and stuff. I think people definitely struggle. Like, mental health is a topic that people definitely struggle to open up about. So yeah, I think a lot of young people are struggling.
Yeah, and I think this is something we're constantly hearing from young people saying, but we're not actually hearing on the news. So it's nice to hear being reiterated on this call. Dylan, what's your thoughts on this?
I completely agree with Atia as well. Especially right now with everything going on. Like, from my perspective, mental health is always something that's hard to talk about, especially for young people, because we never really know where our safe space is a lot of the time. Um, but I do think for a lot of people, safe space was school. Some people, it would be the complete opposite, and not having support systems in place like we're so used to, and it just being completely ignored is just very difficult for young people to navigate around.
Brilliant. No, it's really interesting to hear how this kind of pandemic, the coronavirus, has kind of accelerated those issues. That's actually something which is really important to look at. Obviously, both of you are saying it's a really bad state, and I'd agree from what I'm hearing from other young people. But thinking about it, like, what has made it come to this stage? What have we ignored all this time? Aaliyah, I'd come to you on this one. What have we ignored on all this time to make it reach this stage?
I think we've ignored what young people actually tell us about their mental health. Like when people do end up opening up about their struggles, I think it's not taken as seriously, because to other people it's just like, oh, it's just a young person going through basic like teenage things. I don't think people actually understand how bad it can be. Just because you're younger and you may be struggling with mental health, it doesn't make it any less important. I mean, I think that's something that people need to remember. And also in terms of like school and stuff, I think people forget that these exams and all the stress that is put onto us really can affect a person, and not having these things in place within school or within like, because I think a lot of people struggle with family. So if you don't have things like this in place in school, then how are young people supposed to cope with everything that's going on in their lives, whether it be school things or other things that go on in their lives?
Yeah, 100%. There seems to be a lack of care and responsibility on this issue. And one of the reasons, looking at structurally why this isn't happening, because a lot of the responsibility has been put on schools. And even though they can do a lot for young people like me, I mean, like, you're in school every single day, so it is an institution which can really help. However, when there's no really care for it, where there's grades are probably viewed higher than it, it kind of gets dismissed. So one school might be amazing at it, but the other school might be really hard. So I'll talk about this projects that's happening on that in a bit. But that kind of level of commitment and continuity, as you're saying, Leah, absolutely seems like a recurring theme. Dylan, what do you think?
I agree with everything that Tia said, definitely. And to add on what you were saying about the fact that it's always given down to schools to make sure the students' well-being is okay, and there's not a lot given to the schools to actually tackle the issue properly. A lot of schools, they'll have like in-school like counseling, some sort of service, but a lot of the time they will also decide to like refer students to a place like CAMS, which is the Child Adolescent Mental Health Services. But the thing is, the places they're getting referred to, which will give students like free help, is also places that are very underfunded by the government. Places like CAMS, very underfunded, and the support that people do get, especially at times like this, is far less than what they should be getting. Like, from my opinion, I think right now, in a time where everyone's talking about mental health and the crisis that's being caused by the pandemic, there's a lot less mental health services in place to help, which is definitely accelerating what's been going on as well.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely 100%. Covering all the right points when you say that. And person's perspective, like, it's quite verbatim and it's quite honest. And I do hope that on this call today we have people, not just, I think other young people, they'll be echoing your voice. So it'd be, yeah, we know, like, nodding along. I can imagine people on the other side of the screen. But hopefully we have some people in policy and positions who actually take on these words and do something about it. So thanks for that. So if we do, by any chance, what I'd like to do, Dylan, we can come to you, and Aaliyah, you can answer this next one. If you were to give one advice, it actually could be more than one advice, but if you were to talk about a model of how you'd like to see like mental health being supported, how can different organizations work together to support the issue, what would you say is something we can do as a society or the government could do in order to make that difference? Dylan, why don't I come to you first?
I think one of the biggest things from my perspective is when it comes to youth mental health, in like talking more specifically, a lot of the time, I think Atia touched on this earlier, whenever we're putting in a position where we're trying to get help, it's a lot of us being told what to do to make ourselves better or have a better sense of well-being. But it's almost a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. They're kind of like, this will help you because it helps other people. Like, I'm sure loads of people have heard about like mindfulness, stuff like that, but I understand that there's like scientific like research and stuff to back certain things, but it gets to a point where if you're not listening to the person who needs help and what they actually want out of it, they're not going to reach out for that help anymore, because they're just going to be getting the same thing again and again that they know won't help them. So I think it's definitely about actually trying to talk to people, especially our age, and understanding that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It should be a case-to-case basis.
Brilliant, thank you so much, and that's so precise. I know we're taking notes on this meeting. It'll be really helpful afterwards to read this back, and we can actually project on this. To our young people listening to this, Dylan, you've talked so much that we could actually start campaigns on that, so thank you so much. I've seen Hamad's joined the call. Hi, Hamad.
Hello, sorry I'm late. I was just having loads of technical issues all at once.
Absolutely fine, no worries. Nice to have you. Can we throw you straight in the deep end and ask you a question?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, brilliant. So we're talking about right now the current state of mental health. I think we've kind of come to a consensus that it's been let loose, and because of that, it's kind of spiraled out of control to a certain extent. Now we're hoping that there are people on this call who do have position to make a change, and if there isn't, we also have a lot of young people on this call who we can inspire to join, like to push for that change. So if we could push for things, something that could make a difference to support people with mental health, how different organisations could work together, how we can inspire, what could we do, or the government could do, to improve the situation for those struggling with mental health issues at the moment?
Well, I think everything sort of comes to this sort of one idea of how seriously we take mental health issues. And we have to be honest with ourselves. We care so much for physical health. We have the whole NHS, we have an entire hospitals network, everything. But when it comes to mental health, we don't even have mandatory school counsellors for every school. So I think the biggest thing that we all need to sort of strive towards and try to influence government and everywhere is, first of all, recognising mental health as important as physical, if not more important than physical, because let's be honest, when it comes to physical health, one of the biggest issues we have is with PTSD, with the mental recovery. But nobody sort of talks about that out of a physical health context. So I think the first biggest important thing is not only do we remove the stigma of mental health, this whole idea of, okay, well, suck it up, man up. Not only do we remove that, but we take it seriously as it's supposed to be, and then actually consider policy in a very serious context. So I think that's the most important and critical thing. Once we've done that, then for young people especially, we need to focus on schools, and we need to have a sort of a schools-based approach, because that's what's going to be central to every young person's life. Does that?
Well, that's so important to hear, Hamad. Thank you so much, because it's true. We could give step-by-step, very precise, practical guidelines on this will improve mental health, this will improve mental health. Whereas it's true, the passion and the theory needs to be behind it, and the true understanding of what it means, the struggle which is going on. Those practical steps will not work unless that kind of understanding is there. So thank you so much. I don't know if Aaliyah, if you share some of the same thoughts about how we can support that as a society. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Dylan and Hamad said. I think it's really important, because I think, like when Dylan said about the one size doesn't fit all kind of thing, it's true, because I think we need to recognize the fact that when a young person does open up about their mental health, things might be different for them at home. Like, not everyone's situation is the same. I know in the South Asian community, mental health is very stigmatized. So it's very difficult for us to reach out and open up to our family about it. Not everyone's parents are so understanding. So I think making sure that the school understands that, like how that person can deal with, because like not a child is at school every day, so like all the time. So when they're at home, how can they deal with their mental health, because it might be a lot harder for them. So I think it's just making sure that we as well as facilitating the schools with things, we need to facilitate parents at home as well, like having classes and meetings for the parents so that they know they understand what mental health really is about.
really interesting. Yeah, education completely. Unfortunately, we're in a society where people think education is only for us young people. I'm not sure if you lot would agree, but that's kind of been proven on many different occasions. But with this, we actually need to actually see that change, and then to not just realize it, but actually do something about the fact that things which wouldn't have been taught in the past, how are you going to compensate for people who have left school 30 years ago, 40 years ago, haven't learned the importance of mental health and going to society is kind of struggling with that understanding. Yeah, I completely agree with you. For us young people, it's important as well, because then people are meant to be having care over us, and not always do they understand the issue because they never had it as part of their education. So not even curriculum for life for us, curriculum for life, I suppose, for everyone in society. It's absolutely brilliant. I'd like to go back to Hamad, if that's okay, because some of the points you touched on about looking at the kind of future of this and how we will do it. What do you think is the biggest barrier? Because you were talking about how some people don't get it, but what do you think is the biggest barrier to overcoming a society where mental health is dealt with properly?
The biggest barrier is, like, we've all touched on it and we'll continuously repeat it and everyone will get bored of it, but it's education, isn't it? And the most sort of primary focus. And until we can get that grip of what mental health is, how important, how critical it is, until we can actually finally realize, and to be fair, we have made some progress, but until we can realize that mental health is perhaps the most important thing, only then can we seriously start to look into this issue. So the stigma behind mental health, especially men's mental health, and the stigma in sort of South Asian communities and other BAME communities, and just the general stigma around it, and sort of the fact that we refuse to take it seriously is, I think, for me, the biggest barrier.
Thanks so much. Yeah, them groups, there are, I think you've highlighted this, there's specific groups who, because of stigma, because of rhetoric, and in some cases this circumstance, they are made more vulnerable by this kind of crisis that's going on at the moment. Dylan, I don't know if you can share any of your thoughts on that. Do you think that's a big barrier, or do you think there's another bigger barrier which is preventing us from getting us to like a more wholesome, supportive society?
Honestly, I think I definitely really much when you talk about education being a massive barrier, because getting the education put in place where everyone's got access to the same kind of resources where we can learn about mental health. And it's with mental health, I think it's very much a progressive kind of learning, because it's something that's always changing. We're always thinking differently about it, and the fight against mental health, a lot of it I feel like is campaign based at the moment, and I understand why, because it's very hard to get it into education unless there's almost a set in stone kind of thing. Because I feel like right now a lot of things, people like, if it's in education, it's something that's like set in stone. It's a lot of like facts and figures and stuff like that. There's not much like abstract things, and I think mental health is very abstract sometimes. And people don't think about that all the time. It's all, people think of it on like based on symptoms and that kind of stuff. So I definitely agree with that. And I also, in addition to that, it's the getting our voices heard. That's a massive barrier, and actually bringing the importance to the forefront, whether that be like in the government, or they can make policies and things, or like getting policies in place to actually be able to help, and not having it so that just a few people that are at the top of society that are in charge of it, and people like us can actually have a voice in it. I think that's a massive barrier.
No, I'm really, really interested to hear everybody's thoughts. Seriously, really good on that front. Aliyah, you mentioned also the kind of difference between the kind of struggles that certain ethnic groups and certain individuals might face because of this. Now, what I'm really interested in finding, because we're coming to the end of the session now, I'd just like to hear the closing remark. If this is left unattended, how could this affect society as a whole, and why is it important that people actually sit and take this seriously?
I think if mental health isn't something we tackle at the moment, then it definitely will affect the entire future, because we are the future. and if it isn't something that we talk about enough, I think one way to break the barrier is that we have to talk about it more. Even if it is within our BAME communities, I think that the more we speak about it, the more people actually start to understand what it's about. Like, it is difficult, of course, like everyone knows it's really hard, but we have to take that first step, otherwise no one's going to understand what we actually go through, and that's the only way we can actually make sure that we have a better future, and so that like our mental health doesn't affect our work life and everything else that comes with it.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, absolutely. So it has a bigger impact on young people as a whole. Dylan, I'll come to Dylan, then I'll come to Hamad. Final remarks and kind of the same comment, same question. Young people, society as a whole, how will it affect them?
Just adding on to what Atia said, exactly what she said, but also I think it's a lot of hope like if we are not fixing this and making change, young people are just going to start losing hope more, and that's not what we want. I think that's the biggest thing. Yeah.
Brilliant. So it's really hard for me to hear everything, so I'm really trying to listen to your mouth move to try and see who's stopped talking, who's starting talking. But no worries. It's been a really interesting session. And Hamad, seeing as I know you've had so much, you probably still want to say. Final remarks. What would you say? How can this affect society, and why is it important? Anything you want to tell the audience?
Well, I mean, let's have a look at what we think are the biggest issues for young people right now. Suicide is the biggest killer amongst young people. Knife crime is incredibly important. Gang violence is sort of talked about always, especially with postcode gangs in London and elsewhere. All of these problems, and okay, also one of the biggest things we have right now is education. We need to focus on our grades and etc., etc. All of that comes down to one singular thing, and that singular thing is mental health. We need to recognise absolutely everything we do in our lives is ruled, governed by how healthy our mental health is. If we don't feel well mentally, we're not going to do well, just sort of in general with all of our different responsibilities. It's all central to mental health. And so, you know, every single thing you can possibly think of, that's what bad mental health is going to affect in our society.
You know what? This whole conversation, this whole talk, to us as young people, some of us, it might be just a recap and a good little summary of the whole situation as a whole. But all the work, the panelists, guys, thank you so much have been saying. Sure, you might think you're just saying the obvious, but trust me, if there are people on this call who are making that difference, who are making that policy, to them, this is revolutionary talk, this is reform, and this is things that they might not be hearing ever. I remember because all of us here, I recognize, is involved in some form of youth work, and we've walked into rooms and we've said the same messages. So if you relate to that, that means you can repeat them words. If you repeat them words more often, that means education happens. And people are pointing out, education is definitely needed on this issue. So take the stuff we've learned from this session today. If you're not activated in any youth kind of politics or activism, that's okay, and you don't have to be. But still keep repeating this rhetoric if you really want this to change. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much. Hamad, Aliyah, Dylan. I've been Theo, your host. I'm going to pass it back to Aliyah. He's going to go on to the second panel. Thanks, Aliyah. Thanks, guys.
Hey, that was amazing. So now what I need to do is move everybody who is currently a panelist back into the audience. So feel free, guys, to watch. Bear with me a second. We just love technology, don't we? Thank you so much for that discussion. And now we are moving on to panel 2, which is really, really exciting one. And our host for that is Dylan, another Dylan. And let me just make Dylan host, and then he will introduce it. Thank you, guys.
I was muted. Okay, great. Great start. I promise I know how to use Zoom. Okay, so my name is Dylan. I'm going to be hosting the next panel, which is on climate, environment, and sustainability in education. So we have 3 people. We have Charlie, Ziri, and I hope I said that right. Correct me if I said it wrong. And Jessica. So I'm right that all-
Desiree.
Is that right? Sorry.
It's Desiree.
Okay. So you're all from Teach the Future, right?
I am.
I know you are, but I don't know Jessica. Okay. So Charlie and Thazeri are from Teach the Future, which is a campaign demanding climate education in all of school education. And then I don't really know you, Jessica. So if you want to introduce yourself, go for it.
I just hopped on. It's an interesting topic, and I'd love to discuss it.
Awesome. Cool. So there's a few questions, and the first one is, who are you and how does climate education fit into the general conversation about education reform? So Desiree, do you want to go first?
So I'm Desiree, I'm 16, and I think that climate education fits into the conversation of education reform because right now, especially in this country, we're moving forward into a time where we are trying to decarbonize our economy, and the youth are not prepared, they're not educated on that change. And I think the whole point of education to me is preparing students for the future, and education has to move through the times, and it hasn't yet, and that's what Teach the Future is kind of fighting for, really.
Charlie, do you want to go?
Yeah, definitely. So hi, I'm Charlie and I'm 14, and as Dylan mentioned, I work with the Teach the Future campaign. So I'd say that the climate crisis and education around it fits in with education reform because learning is about the preparation of young people for their future livelihoods, for entering industries and getting new jobs. And if we don't teach young people about the harmful effects of the climate crisis and how it will force change in society, whether that's through option and tackling it or through the climate crisis, having harmful effects on communities, there will be an effect on society and change must happen. So by preparing young people and equipping them with the correct tools, we're allowing them to follow the principles of learning as a whole and to go into their lives with the correct tools that they need.
Yeah. Jessica.
And hi, I'm Jessica. I'm 16. I'm just representing the Pupil Power campaign. And I think the issue of climate education fits in perfectly with reform of the educational system itself, because I think currently it overlooks climate education and disregards such an important topic, which is ironic because they say that they're preparing us for the future, and the future is exactly that, because I think that the issue of climate has a lot to do with innovation itself. So I think if we're not interlinking these two things, it doesn't make sense, which is why it needs to be reformed.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. So the second question is about why does it matter to you? So I know that Teach the Future was created by the UK Student Climate Network originally. So it started with the idea of actually sacrificing and skipping school to protest about climate change. So it's quite interesting that that led on to actually reforming education as well. So why would you say you went from talking about just environmental and sustainability work and then switching that into education as well? Zara, do you want to go first?
I think that a lot of the rhetoric around the climate crisis kind of ignores the social issue that comes with climate change. We see it as something that's environmental. We hear it like its effects in the weather, but we don't really hear how these weather patterns and how the sea levels rising really affect communities. I mean, geography does it okay, right? We learn about desertification, we learn about island nations, we learn about how our own coasts are being eroded because of more and more violent weather patterns. But it's more it's about people, and we need to try and get these people to connect with them, because there seems to be such a disconnect between us in higher income countries compared to people in middle and lower income countries. To me, not caring makes no sense, right? Because it will affect everyone, just not equally. And to me, not caring shows a complete disregard to people that like aren't white and people who live in sub-Saharan Africa, people who live in island nations. I just find it's important to talk about it, really.
Yeah, definitely. That quite relates to like a whole topic of that we're not taught compassion in school and to care about other communities, which is very clear in climate change. We have to care about people other than ourselves, especially when we're in quite a privileged country. In higher geography in Scotland, you get taught the benefits of climate change. So definitely a deep misunderstanding of that there. Sophie, you've joined us. Do you want to quickly talk about who you are and then we'll get back to the question?
Sure, I had a bit of a tech issue joining, but yeah, I am a campaigner for Teach the Future, like Charlie and Isn't. Sorry, I'm really bad at naming. And I'm really passionate about climate education because I feel like my whole life I've been taught a lot which will not really get me far in the world, and I really I really feel like education is meant to empower young people, but how can they be empowered if they're going to know like pretty much zero about an event which will like define their whole life, pretty much. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, back to Charlie, just about the same stuff we were saying before.
Yes, I'd say there's often quite a disassociation within society of the causes of the climate crisis and the industries that fuel it, but also the effects that has on individuals as well as habitats and the environment generally. So when we say that we want reform around the education system about the climate crisis, we're not only asking for the climate action, but also climate justice, which encompasses both climate action and social justice, about how we can support frontline communities and uplift the very ways in which they are able to tackle the climate crisis, which is affecting them the most at the moment. So it's definitely a combination of both there.
Definitely, yeah. Jessica, you're coming at it from a slightly different angle because you're not in Teach the Future, so you're coming at it from an education angle first. So what's brought you into being interested about environmental and sustainability work?
So first of all, just from a moral standpoint, because of course, like as an individual that lives on the planet, I care about the planet. But as was previously said by Charlie, it's something that doesn't just affect us as an individual, and we tend to think that we can't learn, and that the other, like again, what was mentioned about learning about desertification, that's it. And then I wasn't taught, well, from what they're doing, what can we do where we are to prevent this? What can we do? How can we transfer our skills to help others? And I think that kind of transfer of skills, which I think is the basis for all of this, has a lot to do with, again, education and how our, I guess, educational potential, or like our capital in terms of like our human capital, but in an educational standpoint, hasn't been tapped into yet, because we're not allowed to explore all these other avenues, and we're not allowed to find education from other cultures and from other people that have already been doing it way before we have. So yeah, it's just crazy to think that the current system is literally setting us up for failure, and the education system is preventing us from not being set up into failure. So it's just, yeah, it's very complex.
Yeah, it's very complex, yeah. So kind of related onto that is, you've kind of all touched on it a bit, is why is it so important that young people are taught about the climate crisis and not just in GCSE geography? So how come this isn't just something you can be interested in, it's something that affects everybody? And what kind of proposals would you suggest, and has Teach the Future made into how to incorporate this into all levels of education? Desiree? Sorry.
Well, limiting climate change education to just science and geography, like one of our beliefs is that that's just restricting, it restricts the education, but also it makes it seem to students that climate change is only for scientists and geographers, when it really is, it affects everyone and affects everyone's life, you know, and everyone's life is going to be changed. And about the campaign, so we've got like 3 asks, a review on like I can't remember them, I'm gonna be honest. But we want education buildings to be retrofitted to be net zero by 2030, and we want sustainability to be a thread throughout the entire, like throughout all of education, because like in geography, for example, sustainability is all the way through it, but that should be in every single thing as well, because, you know, the whole point of, like, I think one of, to me, the purpose of life is to like make sure the world is even better, and sustainability does just that, in my opinion.
Great. Charlie, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I'd say that the climate crisis needs to be taken out of, you know, just 2 optional subjects, because in many schools those subjects are chosen, and like Fizri was saying, that gives the impression that the climate crisis and learning about the climate crisis and the knowledge that you can be equipped with to be able to mitigate it is only for a handful of people who are interested in it. But we know that the climate crisis is indiscriminate, and it won't choose the individuals who have been taught in these optional subjects, or it won't just affect the industries that the people who have been taught about the climate crisis have entered into. So it's really important that young people are given the opportunity to learn about the climate crisis from all perspectives in every available subject, because there are so many places in the curriculum where the climate crisis and the education around it could be woven through, and where it could be placed in. And there's lots of different subjects that it's really relevant in, like the food technology, for example, and the education around the animal agricultural industry, and history, and how colonialism has caused a disproportionate effect of the climate crisis on the global south. So there are lots of different areas in which it can slot in. But in terms of just Teach the Future, as Fizri was saying, we have 3 asks. So the first one is asking for the government, specifically the Secretary of State for Education, to commission a review into how the climate crisis is currently taught in schools. And the second one is for the implementation of a new professional teaching standard for education providers, to make sure that teachers themselves are adequately equipped to be able to teach about the climate crisis. And our third ask is for the implementation of an English Climate Emergency Education Act in England, and in Scotland a Scottish Climate and Biodiversity Emergency Education Act, both of which would make it compulsory for the climate crisis to be taught in every school, but it also free up lots of different funding to be put into areas like the creation of green vocational qualifications and the setting up of sustainability colleges, as well as retrofitting all government-owned educational buildings by 2030 to net zero grids. There's also a 4th ask in Scotland, which isn't carried out in England, but it's part of the Teach the Future Scotland campaign, which is asking for the climate crisis to be part of the criteria in school inspections and assessments when schools are being ranked on the areas in which they teach well in.
Yeah, that's really, really good. I completely agree with what you said about how it relates to all different subjects. I don't know what your equivalent is, but we have RMPS, which stands for Religious, Moral, Philosophical Studies. So there's lots of morality you could definitely talk about in there. We have an environment category, but it doesn't link to the climate because, again, that's seen as a scientific thing. So I think it's really good to try and get that shift into this as a social justice issue as well as a scientific one. Sophie, do you want to go?
I mean, we've kind of touched upon it, but like it's quite worrying that we look at climate in that scientific lens, and we really need to look at how every element can relate to it. Like often people view like economics as a complete opposing, but they can be integrated in a circular economy and many other ways, which I feel like young people aren't really being taught about. And if they were taught about climate and and it got woven in the way that Teach the Future are kind of highlighting it could be, then young people wouldn't be, well, hopefully wouldn't be as concerned and worried about it, and rightfully they are. I mean, a lot of people are incredibly anxious, and eco-anxiety is a real problem at the moment. But I feel like if people knew how it could link to everything, they would maybe feel a bit more optimistic. They could approach it from like a variety of areas. You don't have to be like an engineer to tackle it. You can be interested in like economics or art and be able to really tackle it. Yeah.
Yep. Jessica, what kind of things would you like to see, proposals you would make on how to like include this, and where in the education system you'd put it?
I think I completely agree with the fact that it should be implemented everywhere, and it shouldn't be optional to learn about something that you will have, like, you'll be impacted by. And I think what we have now, what happens is people that don't pick geography or aren't forced to pick geography or aren't forced to learn about it, what some of them do, unfortunately, is they end up developing kind of a mindset of what environmentalism is. They think that if you're an environmentalist, you're like this like minimalistic Zen fanatic that counts every single droplet of water and thinks like incredibly positively about life. Like, that's not what it is. It's someone that has understood their potential and has realized, you know what, I'm going to do whatever's in my power to contribute to a very important cause. So definitely with just implementing it, I think in practical ways, for instance, in PDE education, and starting from there and then throwing it into every single subject, because it, as said by Charlie, it can be woven into practically anything. And I think it would be beneficial for everyone to have it implemented somewhere so that they can understand its place and see how it is much broader than just whatever's taught in geography.
Yeah, totally. If you could get young people to do anything related to climate education, what kind of things would you ask for them to do, and what would you ask for teachers and schools to do on a local and national scale to try and change our education system to include the climate? Desiree, do you want to go first?
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I was a little bit distracted.
If you could get young people to do one thing to help change things, and you could get teachers and schools to do something on a local and national scale to properly implement climate education, what kind of things would you want people to do?
It's quite difficult to implement change to the education system on a local level, so it really has to be done nationally. I'm just gonna say, like, in the future, Teach the Future is like going to delve more into public support. So once that happens, like, just throw all your support, you know, into Teach the Future as you can, but also sign up for a mailing list, you know, if you have the money to donate to the campaign. And also, you know, just speak up with like teachers who are probably part of unions and say that, hey, by the way, I think I want to learn more about climate education. You know, what union are you part of? Can you like bring this up? Maybe the teachers' unions can fight for it, you know. So that's what I think you could
do. Charlie, what kind of things would you suggest?
I definitely say that I think there's a lot of variation on the change and action that can happen on a local scale, dependent on the ownership and running of a school. So like private schools and independent schools and academies don't necessarily have to follow the national curriculum as much as state-owned schools do. And I think that allows for a lot more movement in what individual teachers and departments and head teachers are able to do within their schools. So what I'd really like to see is within those schools, the reframing of some of the topics that are currently taught at the moment, because it wouldn't necessarily, although in many subjects there could be additions made to the curriculum, a lot of the time it can just be the reframing of the topics that are currently taught to then be able to better represent the climate justice angle and perspective that needs to be taken, and move away from that kind of tunnel visioned view on a particular topic and look at every different issue that affects that. But in terms of state schools, I think it really it must happen at a national level unless mayoral offices have devolution deals, which only happens in a handful of places across the country. So I'd really like to see the government consider and possibly even implement our legislation, the English Climate and Emergency Education Act, or the Scottish Climate and Biodiversity Education Act mentioned earlier as well. So I think that could make a real change in being able to adequately prepare young people for their futures.
Also, you can email your MP.
That too. That would be really good to get it into Parliament and political spaces. And you had that political thing way before lockdown where you met up at the Parliament with a bunch of MPs. So that was really, really good as well. Jessica, what kind of things would you say?
I think with this situation, I think it requires baby steps, because again, it can seem like it's hard to implement it into a local level, but I think it all starts with showing that they actually care. If schools showed that they cared about the environment, they don't, but for instance, in my school, they don't even have recycling bins, like the print, like a basic recycling bin, they don't have. And so it's just these little things that show first to the students, oh, we care, and then implementing it into the educational system, starting from minor kind of bite-sized lessons, and then hopefully in the future we'll see a different kind of a shift in the educational system. But I really do think it, you know, it has to start small, because there's so much, like, realistically, there's so much bureaucracy and there's so much complexity in these systems that if you just start with baby steps, with things that are easy and, to be honest, don't require a lot of effort from schools, they will start to want to adopt it because they'll see the benefit in the long term.
As well as schools themselves, I think that by having those small changes, those small sustainable actions within schools, shows to students that the schools and the education system as a whole does care about their futures and the climate crisis and the effects that it will have on society. And, you know, we can't expect young people to listen and fully understand the extent of the climate emergency if their schools themselves are contributing to the environmental damage that is causing the destruction of the planet itself as well. So I think those changes remove that level of almost hypocrisy when we're teaching about sustainability, but while simultaneously using unsustainable practices.
Yeah, Sophie sent a couple, a different Sophie sent a couple things to us, Sophie Christophe, which would be really cool to talk about. So I'll send that to all the attendees. It's a way you can quiz your head teachers on the changes you can make at school, and then there's a list of lots of events you could attend if you're interested in trying to affect change. So that'll be really interesting. I'll send them in a second. Sophie Price, different Sophie, what kind of things would you want to see happen?
I mean, my main recommendation would be emailing your MP, because people often forget how much that can actually impact Parliament. If you have your MP, it's kind of like friend with the Gavin Williamson, you know, you could have a policy going, a bill like getting passed relatively quickly. And Teach the Future had a letter writing campaign on the built environment, like what Charlie was talking about, making your educational building net zero, and that actually can like have quite a big impact if tons and tons of people around the country are talking to the MP, trying to get them to make a big change. It can happen quite quickly if a lot of people do it at one time.
Yeah. This is deviating from the original questions a little bit, but I thought it'd be quite interesting to touch on. So the past couple of years, there's been a lot more climate awareness than normal, mostly due to the school strikes, and then there's been Extinction Rebellion and lots of protests about this, and kind of the biggest engagement we've ever seen. So why would you say we maybe haven't implemented climate education yet, and what are some issues with consumable resources? Because there's a lot of climate science out there, but it is very hard to consume. So what are some kind of like, what are your thoughts on kind of those kind of things basically? Charlie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so I'd say that I think there's a lot of hesitance within industry and within government to divest, for example, from fossil fuels, or to move away from using products and resources that are environmentally damaging. And I think that's because there is such a high financial stake within these companies that they've built up over multiple years. And now a lot of research has come out and has been platformed by quite a large chunk of people within society who really want that change. And I think that the more people that build traction behind the climate movement and support any support issues and support process, calling on politicians to take action, implement legislation, and hold companies to account, the more action that will change. And I think that although over the past few years is when the climate movement has really taken off, and there is on a large scale, that there has been quite a considerable amount of action and recognition during that short time period, albeit not enough. But the more we continue and the more momentum that is built behind the movement, I think there will definitely be more change. I think that it's also really important to recognise that for change to really happen and for carbon emissions to really drop, there must be a systemic action over individualised action, because currently there's a lot of rhetoric and messaging around individuals and specific members of society changing the ways that they live their lives, but sustainable actions within the current market, because there isn't the change from company and industry, is quite inaccessible to many people. So systemic change is definitely the route to go, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. The systemic one's really important, and that is basically what changing climate, the education system is, and implementing all these things. It's good systemic change that will benefit everybody. Thiziri, do you want to go?
In my thoughts, the reason that the government really hasn't made changes to the system and hasn't reformed anything to do with climate education is because the Tory government doesn't like moving forwards in that regard. They're pretty static with how they think that students should be educated. They have a traditionalist viewpoint. They want students to learn about British values. They want to make the country seem as amazing as possible. And it's a very, very British exceptionalist education system that they want to put forward, and climate education just isn't part of that ideology to them. And so it's really, really difficult to get through to a government who is so stationary in their views, and that's why I don't think they've changed at all.
Jessica, what do you think?
I think if you were just to blame one thing primarily, it would probably just be the force of habit, because no one's really being forced or encouraged even to invest in sustainable technology in the first place. And I think this is where it kind of, I don't know if I'm being biased, but it kind of ties into like economics, because very simply, what they could just do is just give targeted loans with like good interest rates to companies that invest in sustainable technologies. That would be step one. It'd be basic. It'd be so not like easy to do, but the force of habit and the lack of kind of urgency is, I would say, the main thing.
Yeah, it does seem to be quite related to adults don't feel the same sense of urgency that young people do, purely just because they won't be around to experience it, and it's really harder to understand when we've just been thrown into this oh my god, my future might not exist kind of attitude. Sophie, what do you think?
Well, definitely agree that like if you've only been around for like 15 years, you know that to know that you're not going to have like, I don't know, 15 more would be like pretty traumatic. But going on from like what Jessica kind of mentioned, like that we don't have that kind of urgency. I feel like now, well, hopefully from COVID-19, maybe we're like beginning to get an idea of what urgency can mean, not like a 10-year gradual shift, like now kind of action. And I feel like because of the kind of impact of people, world leaders are kind of getting an idea that like of what action, immediate action can be. I mean, maybe not, they haven't quite got immediate action, but they're getting there. And I feel like from that, maybe, I'm quite hopeful, but I'm hoping that they'll have learned from that and will implement quite rapid change going forward.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's been talked about. The relation to COVID-19. You know, we declared a climate emergency ages ago and haven't seen nearly the same amount of change as we have in COVID. So clearly they're capable of doing changes like this. It's just a choice not to, which is quite telling about their priorities, let's say.
There's also a really good opportunity to recover from the pandemic as well, with so much investment into the economy and into reboosting industries. It's such a shame to see that, you know, not a lot of investment has been put into sustainable industries, and like Jessica mentioned, providing loans to smaller businesses who want to who want to take a green perspective on how they can make their products and how they can sell. So hopefully in future budgets there will be an increase in the amount of funding put into green industry, because currently there in the previous budgets there hasn't been a lot, but there definitely is, and the pandemic has provided that level of urgency and a platform to also build upon, because carbon emissions did drop during lockdown, but sadly those are increasing, and there hasn't been a lot of effort to maintain that, you know, heightened level of biodiversity, but also that lowered level of carbon emissions.
Yeah, totally. That was really well said. Okay, so we're gonna just wrap up about now. Thank you so much. You all spoke really well. I'll bring Alina back now, and yeah, we'll go on to the next panel.
That was amazing. That was honestly, like, I was so kind of engaged with that whole entire conversation. So thank you to each and every one of you. And again, thank you to Dylan for hosting that conversation so well. So we're going to move on. I'm going to do my magic again and somehow swap our panelists. So bye guys, everyone do like a little virtual wave. Okay, I'm going to take you guys off screen and then we're going to swap over. Bear with me one moment. Okay, and now I'm going to add Ava, who is our host for the next panel. So once Ava's on, I will add everybody else. Hey Ava. Right, over to you. I'm going to add the rest of your panel, so you're not going to be alone, don't worry.
I just realised I'm on mute, I'm really sorry. So hi, I'm Ava, and I'm going to be running the class culture and colour panel, and our panellists are just joining now. So this is the first panellist who's joined on my screen, Simi, and she is part of Pupil Power and part of Not a Trend, and I know her quite well. And then we have Divine and Nadia and Akia, who are all part of Pupil Power, I do believe. And if you guys, and we're going to be discussing, as I previously mentioned, class culture and colour, and I think it's going to be really exciting. Going on, obviously, with the A-level results coming in, has a lot to do with class, and obviously with the recent events and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys have got to say about this. So yeah, I can begin with the first question. What are the intersections of class, culture and colour in the UK education system? And would anybody like to go first, or should I pick someone first, kind of up to you guys? Okay, would you like to go first and say? Sorry, I've kind of put you on the spot there.
This is a question in itself. The intersections, you have to look at the students, because this is what we're talking about now. I think a highlight, or if you want to answer that question, I think A-levels would be a good example. I think the fact that there's a disadvantage point within standardizing the grades, even though nobody took exams, but yet there's been a higher percentage, so there's been approximately a 3% increase in the amount of A's and A stars awarded to private schools, as opposed to 0.4% in public schools and those in disadvantaged areas. So I feel as if when you look at that highlights class, but then if you want to go even deeper into that, that will go into discrimination within the school system anyhow, because now you go into the race of the students that attend these disadvantaged schools, and that's not in their favor either. So now what you have to keep in mind is that when you constantly divide, you get to a point where the student that is seen as the least likely to achieve is going to be at the level where it's hardest to achieve, because if you're expected not to achieve, everything will be in your power, or all the obstacles that will be in your way will exponentially increase, as opposed to my private school counterpart, if that makes any sense. So I feel as if a good example would be the A-level results to see the intersection.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the whole situation with all of like the results coming through has really highlighted this. Obviously, we already knew that this was happening. We already knew there was an educational gap between students of different races, students of different classes, but I think this just highlighted it further. Divine, would you like to answer next?
Yeah, sure. I think everything that was just said was spot on. It's not right. As in, I'm still kind of shocked. And I don't really know what to expect, because I'm a year 11 student. So next week is us and our GCSEs. And although some people might not think it's obvious, maybe as important, because there's unis and further life, which I can take into consideration, I do still feel very nervous. And coming from all girls school in Southeast London, my postcode not being advantage in any way, where I'm from isn't, I think I could basically, a lot of us probably have the right to be a little bit scared, because of how the government just completely just messed up the A-levels for so many people. Granted, there were some people who were fortunate and did get good results and obviously had worked hard, but there also were so many that did work just as hard, but because of their area, or because of the results from pupils before them in last year, their results were just completely thrown off. And I do think a lot of it obviously has to do with the postcode, and Aka was breaking down within those areas, the type of people, and a lot of them were BAME communities, and the people who would attend those schools are disadvantaged and would come from lower economic, socioeconomic backgrounds. It's very, very scary, and we can yesterday I think just screamed, if we didn't see it before, yesterday 100% told us that there is a massive gap and there's something that needs to be fixed, definitely.
I mean, as a girl who is coming from a Southeast London all girls school, I can totally relate with you there. In year 11, I think I'm feeling suddenly from somewhere I was kind of at a point where I wasn't too stressed about my results coming through. There's been an absolute stinking feeling ever since the Scotland results came out. I was oh no. And then those A-level results came out, and I already knew, even before the results came out, I was doing research, and they knew that there was disadvantages. They knew that there had been discrepancies made, but they didn't do anything about it. And I think it just really shows that the government does not care, and it's really just sickening to see. So I'm going to pass over to Simi now, and I'm going to see what she has to say on this question as well.
Yeah, I think there's such a massive intersection between class, culture, and colour. Like, I think looking at the education system, you can't treat those three things separately at all. And with the A-level results and the Scottish results, it's just shown how much of an intersection there are. Just places like Eton, who, like, I don't think that any of their students were downgraded for like a tiny amount, to other schools where just the whole of UK where 40% of grades were downgraded, and it's disheartening to see. And it's kind of, when you're already disadvantaged in one of those areas, and then if you kind of disadvantaged in all of those areas, it's like this sort of doubling up factor of like everything kind of builds on the top of everything else. And the education system is just a place where it's so evident to see the different inaccuracies and the different inequalities. And it just, as Kieran's trying to say, on A-level, it's just, you've seen it demonstrated, you've got percentages for it as well, and it's just like, it's already in society, and to see it so heavily in education as well, it's preparing you for that, I guess, but it's like preparation that we shouldn't have to get, and students shouldn't have to have alone.
I think, once again, totally agree. I think it really just does show how schools are a reflection of a society, and everything that goes on within schools really does show up like everything that is going on in the world. It's just completely compressed into a small environment where it's been shown with our results, with how we're treated in the classroom, the discrepancies made with regards to class and culture and race. So I think it's quite frankly disgusting. Nadia, would you like to go now and say your piece? You're on mute.
I feel like everybody has already said what I was going to say, but I just don't understand the education system. I don't understand how an area or your postcode can define or determine your intelligence and determine whether you're going to pass or fail your A-levels or GCSEs. Well, I'm in 11, so my results day is next week. But seeing the results and seeing people's reactions from the A-levels that they received I feel like it's just really appalling, like how there's a really big gap in the education system, I don't know, I don't even know how to explain it, but it's just proper, like, it's just mad, it's actually mad. I just can't, like, it's something that we've been needing to improve on for a long time, but like stuff like this, like the inequality in the education system, all to do with race, is just, yeah, I'm just flabbergasted right now. I'm just speechless at this point, but yeah.
Yeah, I once again, like, I just feel it's the shock that we all had to see how big the gap was, because it was highlighted so much to us then, but I think it was shock that we already knew, and it's just things that we've been saying for such a long time, and now it's kind of all manifesting now. And I'm really hoping that with these like results coming out, and I'm guessing, my guess is the GCSE is going to be absolutely like, there's going to be no difference, sadly. But people are going to start listening, and we can hopefully start to mobilise more, so bringing up how unequal our education system is for people of different races, different classes, and different cultures. So yeah. Does anyone have any like final words they want to say in regards to that question, or are we all good to move on? Cool. I'm taking that's what we're going to move on. So I just wanted to throw out there, how do these themes that we discussed in the last question affect your personal experience and other people's experience with education? How do these things stop you from receiving what you believe is a full education? Should we just go in the same order? So Akir, would you like to go?
I think I'm in quite a privileged position in the sense that I think my school recognized my drive to succeed and did their very best to facilitate that, in the sense that there were schemes to go to Russell Group universities. It wasn't directed at me for some reason. That's something I always wanted to know, because in an English class, I think all my white counterparts were given the opportunity. And it's only because one of them, it's only because I overheard one of them saying, I don't want to do it. And I said, okay, Charlie, what don't you want to do? And it's, I don't want to go to work. And I thought, are you mad? So I took up the opportunity. But the fact that it wasn't aimed at me and everybody was white, I just thought, I'm in the same English class, we're all overachievers, but yet there seems to be a division. Other than that, I've kept it the same in terms of always looking for opportunities, always putting myself out there. But within the education system, in terms of what I've learned, I'm a big history buff. I love history. And from year 8, I learned about what slavery was. I already knew what slavery was in the sense of a concept, but even how they taught it, in the sense that there was a overarching theme of looking at how Black people are the slaves, and there was no such thing as slave revolts. We were all just very compliant, that we were just happy to be stuck in boats like sardines, and we were just all silent, and some of us died, some of us lived to see another day. But I feel as if even how slavery was taught, yes, it was bad, but it's not Black history. It just happens to be history. It's world history, really. I don't think it's Black history in the sense that we were just slaves. We only exist when Europeans came into the continent. Not for the first time. Let's get it right. Europeans studied us for a long time. Even the word Ethiopian actually just means Black. It doesn't mean that you're particularly African. It just means literally Black. That's what it means. So they knew of us. It's the fact that now we've been taught that Black people don't exist. Even in Asian history, I even go into South Asian. I've never been taught South Asian history. I've never been taught East Asian history. It's been very Eurocentric history. So I'm not even going to say that Black people are the only ones that are neglected. It's ethnic minorities, if you will, the BAME community, because I don't know Asian history. And it's something that if we're trying to develop the next generation of global citizens, leaders, innovators, creators, that needs to be at the forefront. The curriculum needs to reflect what the ever-changing world that we live in. So that's my piece.
I mean, I completely agree with that. It kind of resonated with what I'd seen in my own school with, I don't know if you guys would know of it, but there was a thing, I think, Timmy, we went to the same school, where there was a thing called a Brilliant Club, and I did some research into it, and that is meant to be aimed at students from a disadvantaged background. But when I looked around at the people who were in the Brilliant Club, and some of these people I knew, been to their houses, were my friends, were not disadvantaged people. I mean, one of them had a fire pit in their garden. Like, come on now. Like, we all know they're not disadvantaged. So why are they being put on a program for disadvantaged students to go to Russell Group universities when they're not disadvantaged? That just doesn't make sense to me, and that just shows like the racism and the classism within my own school, and the bias, and then how history is taught as well. I hadn't even thought about that, but it was almost like slavery was something done to Black people, and they didn't do anything. They were annoyed, a bit annoyed about it, but they went along with it, and that's kind of how that's how it was taught, and it was horrible, but that's it. And then it's taught like, oh well, then one day white people decided that maybe it isn't too great, and they abolished it. And that's kind of how it was taught to us at school, and that is so wrong. So I'll move on to Divine now, and she can say her piece.
Literally what both of you guys were saying, like, it's just resonating. And one thing that I was picking up from the discussion was that I think the idea of equity should be pushed more than equality, because as you were talking about your Brilliant Club, for example, and saying how it was supposed to be for people from disadvantaged backgrounds, and yet there were still people from advantaged backgrounds in Brilliant Club, it just again, it just defeats the whole point of the so-called Brilliant Club. Thank you. Because I think it's very important for us to realize that we're not on a level playing field, and as disadvantaged people, and especially BAME people, Black, speaking for myself, we deserve that go ahead. We deserve the push that I would say my white counterpart wouldn't necessarily need. And not in the fact that white people can't be poor, and I'm not even going to go into that whole discussion, but I'm just saying on the basis of from BAME communities or disadvantaged communities, we do deserve that push that we wouldn't necessarily like get, or that others wouldn't necessarily need. So Brilliant Club, we had it in my school as well. I think it's a very good, I think it works really well, and where I saw it, it did work really well, and it gave us the motivation to be like, wow, okay, we can actually go to Russell Group unis, we can actually do this, do that. Like a lot of my friends there, they would be the first person within their household to go to a uni at all. So it's like, it's very, very, it's helpful for people from disadvantaged backgrounds to get that go ahead and to get the like, yeah, you can actually make it in life. And I also think that when you were touching on Black history and the slavery discussion is also very important, because yet again, we are only being taught that Black people were the slaves. Okay, we had two runaway slaves, but it wasn't even a revolt. Like, we don't get taught about how powerful us as Black people are, or people from BAME communities are, the revolutions, and just like, we're always just taught as in like, we were put in a box and then we maybe rebelled. But no, Black people were here before the idea of slavery. We did so much. We had our own kingdoms, we had our own lives before so-called slavery and before colonization. All these things were coming through, and I think it's very important for us as Black people to learn about other Black people, and us from BAME communities in general, like you were saying about South Asians, Asians in general, Latinos, everybody. I think anybody who's not white, because a lot of our history, a lot of our education is whitewashed, and I really do think that we do deserve to learn and be like, wow, okay, this Black person, for example, the filament lamp, I never knew that that was made by a Black person. I never knew that Black people actually invented things. I was just taught, like you were saying, slave mentality. All Black people were slaves. Two people might have tried to cut, but you know, it wasn't ever a thing where Black people actually are intelligent. I never learned about intelligent Black people. So I was always made to feel less than already from going into history. So I'm getting very, very passionate, but I never got the chance to be like, I'm actually smart. I came from, like, my race are filled with intelligent people, passionate people, and I actually had the chance to go and do something in life. I was always just put in a box automatically from the beginning of education. So I think it's very, very important to decolonize the education system, and this whole British values, and you know, the British Empire was such an amazing thing. Let's break it down more and let's see what it actually meant for all groups of people, not just your stereotypical white British person.
I can literally feel the passion in the room today. Like, it's just like, I feel like so much of the stuff has needed to be said for such a long time. What I've also found really interesting as well is to do with the class situation as well. And now that I think white British working class boys are some of the lowest achievers within the school education system, I think that factor itself shows how this has so much to do with class as well. I think that's like a new statistic coming through. So especially up in the north, so that's come through now. So I think there's the race discussion, but also the class discussion as well, which is a massive thing. And I think there's intersectionality with that as well. So if you're Black and you're from a working class background, if white working class people are not achieving, imagine how that's doing for other people who are from Black backgrounds or from BAME backgrounds as well. That is just it shows how hard it is for anyone to achieve at this point with the elite classes that are going on. And I think it just shows that how much our education system needs to change. So Simi, would you like to go and say your piece?
Yeah, I agree so much with what everyone said. And like with history, the most you'd hear about of Black people before slavery was like the beginning scenes of Roots, where they'd show Kinte in his tribes, and then like immediately he's taken, and that's like all you learn about Black people before slavery, which is ridiculous. And with what Ava was saying about like class and culture, it's so much of like cultural capital, and like the middle class have this cultural capital of seeing these experiences, like having the contacts, going to museums, which has been especially helpful now during like the pandemic, of like the resources they would have. And it's like all these schemes, like the Brilliant Club, like I was part of that, and I think it's good to kind of raise up the high achievers from disadvantaged backgrounds, but then it's about, what about the rest of the people, or the people who are kind of not the top achievers? Like, it's kind of usually like the middle achievers of more privileged backgrounds would still be able to go to uni because they have the contacts, they have the resources. But then it's like, unless as someone like the BAME community, unless you are like getting straight 9s or A stars, like you're really achieving, it's kind of, well, you're just going to have to deal with the stuff you've been given, or like the little scraps, that the leftovers, which is so unfair of kind of teaching the mentality of, unless either you are like white middle class with that cultural capital, you have to be the tops of your fields, otherwise you're not going to get to higher achieving places in society, which is completely, it's not the sort of message we should be sending people. Everyone should feel free to kind of work to the best of their own ability and not feel like I'm working out my best, but my best is not good enough. Whereas for other people, you know, their best is fine because they have the means to work at their best and still do well in life, which is completely like ludicrous.
I think it really just shows that that with what Samy's saying is that it almost kind of perpetuates a standard, is that for you to be successful and black, unsuccessful from a working class background, successful from a BAME background, you have to be some kind of like genius anomaly, and that the majority of people who are from these backgrounds can't be that, and that's wrong, because I mean everybody's, and it seems that if you're white, you're middle class, and you're not in the top percentage, you will have the opportunity to go on to do universities because you've got the cultural capital as well. You've got your parents are taking you to museums from the young class. I can say that from my experience, probably from a family that have been always politicized, always kind of into things like art and stuff, I've had the opportunities which definitely benefited me, and I can say that in my education it gives you that perspective. How about for people who don't have that? And I think it really shows that, and those things are not put in place for students from different backgrounds and from disadvantaged backgrounds, and that's kind of what takes place. So I think it disadvantages those students within their education as well, meaning they're unable to achieve. So Nadia, would you like to finish off with your point?
I totally agree with what everyone has said. I'm in 11, but in history, what we learned in history in year towards year 8 and 9 was literally about slavery, about how black people obviously were slaves, obviously were treated badly, but we was never really taught true black history, like about how intelligent and how smart black people are, how intellectual black people are. We were only taught the downfall of black people, and we were only taught like how they were treated badly. We were never really taught the things that would be interesting. Like, I don't explain it, but it's like we were never really taught that the proper true black history that we shouldn't do no kind of thing. Like Divine said about the lamp. I never even knew that the first person to invent a lamp was a black person. I feel like as a black person as a black person that has parents that are not from this country, so I've literally migrated, I basically immigrants to this country. Their goal is for me to go uni. Like I feel like that's every black person, for them to go uni, to be a doctor. Well, not really a doctor, but to do something that you love. But I feel like the stigma and the stereotype is that black people can't go uni. Or in secondary school, we're not really given as much opportunity as we should get. And I feel like it really demotivates black people, and it really puts us in a position where we think, oh my God, like the injustice that we face in school, secondary school, and just generally in life and in the workplace and in uni or in college, the injustice and the racism that we face really affects us, and how really affects our success rate, and how we're moving forward in the future. But I feel like with the whole Brilliant Club thing, and in my school, I never really had a Brilliant Club. I never really, in primary school I did, but like I feel like minorities, I feel like there's disadvantage. I feel like they feel more demotivated because lack of opportunity. Like, because I feel like for like the high achievers and people that are smart and clever, intelligent, have all of these opportunities, for the people that are not really as high achieving, didn't really have that same opportunity that people that have high achieving, or people that are from the not the working class, the higher class. So yeah, I just feel like Black people can be smart, Black people can go to uni. I feel like everyone should have equal opportunity, but in the education system, there's just a bit of a gap. There's just a bit of a I don't know, like a stigma that you can't be successful. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree once again with everything you said. Like, there's a stigma around it. Like, there's so many things which are put in place by the institutional racism that means that we cannot make it to these positions and get into the universities, can't get into the Russell groups. And once again, it's almost like you have to work twice as hard, 3 times as hard, to even get a chance of going there, to even get our applications through the door. I mean, even down to names. They look at your name and they think, oh no, we don't want you. So even if they haven't even looked at your whole application, they're just looking at your name, you can't get in. How are we meant to succeed? I really would like to be told. And that would be really helpful. So we have 3 more questions, and I have been told I think we are running over slightly, so I will hopefully speed along a bit. So how have the recent events, so that's things such as COVID-19, the BLM protests, and obviously the attention to educational inequality gap, which I think we've kind of already touched on, contributed towards your experience of education? And I'm only going to be able to ask 1 question per person. So would anybody like to answer that question first and have that question? I can read out all of the questions, so you guys can kind of see which ones you would be most interested in. If that's we're running over slightly. So the next one would be, what should be done to challenge the injustices and inequalities on a local and national level? And then, considering a discussion, what is your vision for the 21st century education system? So you'd like the second question? Got it.
Can I have the first one, if nobody minds? But can you repeat it? Sorry, because
the first one is someone's going. I think the last one might have 2 people because there's not enough questions to go around. It's how have the recent events, so that's COVID-19, the BLM protests, and the education equality gap contributed towards your experience? That's when you want the first one.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I feel like we've spoken about like the whole A-level and results and everything, and that already like showed us that there was so much, like such a bad gap. But in terms of COVID and the BLM protests and just movement in general, for COVID, I'd say I don't know if we really thought about it too tough, but there were probably people who may have not had internet or may have not had the resources that they needed to continue with their education, and a lot of them would have come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and they wouldn't have been able to finish like pieces of work, finish their school year at home. And even people who school was like their escape, or school was somewhere where they could feel safe, and maybe they don't have the finances to eat properly at home, or I know there was vouchers and stuff that were being given out, which was obviously quite productive, but just small things like that, I think can definitely put the disadvantaged at another disadvantage, because obviously nobody predicted COVID was going to happen, but I do think that a lot more could have been done in order to keep young people safe during this time, especially the disadvantaged. And even suicide rates have increased. I've been seeing more of like an awareness, I would say, in mental health within the past couple of years. So I think during COVID there were a few schemes and even like adverts on TV that I'd see that kind of pushed the narrative of, if you need help, make sure you know the places like to go and get it. So I thought that was quite productive. With the Black Lives Matter protests, I think obviously, especially for Black people, but for BAME people in general, anybody from a disadvantaged background, it kind of opened our eyes to so much inequality that we face and so much unconscious bias, and there's just so much like systematic racism and inequality within loads of different systems, even the education system. So I would focus on the education system for this meeting. I think that I don't know how much schools did, but obviously because I'm now leaving my school, but for my secondary school, I feel like they could have done more to kind of keep us safe. And like, because it was very scary, like to turn on the TV every day, to be hearing different cases, and even to be on social media. A lot of young people are on TikTok, and a lot of like influencers on TikTok were talking about it. Some people might be confused, they might be scared. So I think with COVID, and then with the the movement coming to light once again and being such a big force, especially on social media, I think it also ties into like mental health and all of that. I just think it's very important for us to know where we can get help, and to I don't know, it highlights again, when people were coming out of their stories and stuff, it highlighted again the inequalities between the classes and colours and cultures, and stories such as, I don't know, wearing braids to school and maybe starting up a fuss, and I don't know, dyeing your hair, and for like a white counterpart dyeing their hair and not getting as much attention. Small things like that really do add up, and even unconscious biases that are in schools. Just the fact that the discussion is being had is very important, and I feel like can push us into a better way for the future.
I mean, perfectly said, like everything you said there, even down to the dyeing your hair situation. Our school had, I mean, some of the stupidest rules known to mankind, but one of them was wearing a headband, like an Alice band. And I have a friend, she's ginger, and she's white, and she wore one. Obviously, you're going to be able to see a black headband against ginger hair, like it's going to stand out. Nothing was ever said to her. When I wore one, I was told that I couldn't wear that. I don't even know how the teacher spotted it, because my hair's like a really dark brown, but I was told to take it off and I couldn't wear it to school. So it's even like little things like that, it really does affect the experience of school. So I'm now going to move on to Akia for the second to last question. And if anybody wants a reminder of that, it is, sorry, I need to always look at it because I have really bad, I can't just think of things off the top of my head without messing it up. What should have been done to challenge injustices and inequalities on a local and a national level? So take it away.
I'd say on any level, it's policy, education, so that's policy stroke mandates. Like Jessica said in the previous thing, it should be incentives for said businesses and corporates, and education, not just within the curriculum, but education in the workplace, corporate world, social media, which in terms of Divine was speaking about, there's many an influencer now informing others and their followers that this is what X is and this is what Y is. So I'd say on a local and national level, you definitely need mandates. You need to be able to have these corporates, have these schools, organizations accountable for their training. So you definitely need to invest from a government level if you really want to see change, because there's been a lot of rhetoric, even today. You know, it's been young people not finally, but coming together and discussing how they feel. And I think it's a good start. But when we want to go to these places, like these schools, these trusts, these organizations, money needs to be invested. And after you put that money into those organizations, you need to now hold them accountable through mandates and policies. So for example, a mandate could be that you need to have, let's say this school has 200 pupils and there's 50 BAME pupils or black pupils. You need to give at least 27 of these black pupils maybe like 3 or 4 Russell Group schemes over the course of 2 years or something like that. You need to be able to hold these organizations accountable. They need to have incentives. Now it's, why should I have to go out of my way? Because schools are busy. Schools are busy. Why should schools have to go out of their way to do so? What happens when they don't go? How are you going to regulate these schools? Even when it goes to environment, have that added on to Ofsted. Even that's what I would say. So be able to regulate them, incentivize, and education, again, just spreading awareness as well. So spreading awareness amongst young people, spreading awareness amongst head teachers, spreading awareness amongst CEOs, people that are secretaries within the government, policymakers. That's what I'd say. And I think that's how you'd be able to tackle the inequalities on a larger scale and have a longer legacy.
don't you just love to see it when like young people know what they're talking about more than any politician off the top of their head's got like a whole plan going on here? Like it's just ridiculous, really and truly. Like, I mean, a kid said it all, probably exactly what the government needs to be doing. So let's be pushing that forward. So I think it's now time to move on to our last question, and Simi and Nadia can both answer that one. And it is, considering our discussion, what is your vision for a 21st century education system?
I think having a vision and thinking about realistically, two unfortunately very different things. So I guess I'll try and talk realistically. Everything you can't society like capitalist, everything comes about money, and a lot of schools through COVID and like massive protests recently have done the normal thing of saying we got emails saying about like how can the schools help to try and fight systemic racism, and like we'll go back and what we have to say. But for as Akia was saying, it needs policy change and it needs funding. And the government, I don't know whether their priorities are on funding that. But if what ideally my vision is that we go back and I think there will be a much better understanding among students and teachers of the sort of disparities between different cultures, different classes and different races that we see through the pandemic, the differences in distribution of resources. I think that's become a lot more apparent, and hopefully, I think it's easier to have these discussions now. And hopefully, schools will open up those channels, open up those spaces to have those discussions. And then once we get that school support, then the government hopefully will see what's going on and start to invest money, which is kind of my own hope and vision towards what we can do and actually start making the government going to do. And are only going to start changing what they actually have. We have to show them that although we've already have been showing as necessary, even more.
I mean, once again, said it all really, and once again, the youth know more than the politicians seem to ever do. So finally, we're going to finish off with Nadia. She's going to be saying our last points on the final question once again. So take it away.
I think Simi basically said everything that came to mind. Really, I don't really have anything more to say on it. Like I feel like she already touched upon everything that I was going to say. But yeah.
Perfect. It's great to see that we've got like solidarity. We kind of all know, we all seem to be kind of going in the same direction, with more investment is needed into our communities and to bring them up and to uplift them. So I'm really happy with the conversation we've had today. I think it's been amazing. Lots and lots of passion in the room, lots of different views. And we have run over. I'm really sorry about that. But I want to say a massive thank you to all of our panelists. Like, you guys were absolutely amazing. Like, I'm actually like a bit like, oh my God, you guys are so good. So thank you so much. And I hope everybody who's watching has really enjoyed it. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you all so much. Like, it was amazing. Like, I'm not even going to go too much into that because I'm really excited now to introduce the next panel. Thank you for your time. I'm now going to again do the magic tricks, shift you all up. If you could all still stay to the end, that would be amazing. I know we are running over time a little bit. Yeah, great guys. So thank you so much. I'm going to make you guys attendees. See you later. Change role, change role. Thank you so much for being an amazing host, Ava.
Thank you.
Okay, right, swapping over. For everybody watching, how are you finding today? And from all 3 panels that we've had so far, what has been the point that's resonated with you most? I would be really interested to know, and I'm sure all our panelists and hosts would love to know too. So our next panel is all on inclusion, and for that we have Dylan who's hosting it. So I would invite Dylan, and voila, he should appear on the screen. There we go. Hey, Dylan. Can you hear me okay? Oh, I think you're on mute.
Yes, yeah,
Okay,
okay.
Dylan, your host. I'm going to mute myself and add everybody else.
Cool. Okay, so welcome to the last panel for today, everyone. So as Aaliyah said, we're doing inclusion, which will be wrapping everything up. This will be touching on a lot of points that have been said through the evening today. So we're going to be touching on the last panel a bit, some stuff on mental health, like everything all together. So we've got Lottie here, I can see already, and we should have Lashini joining us soon, and Catherine, she's on, I'm not sure if she's there.
I'm so sorry. I think we've lost a couple of our panelists. So if you guys just go into it, and then if you see them magically appear on your screen, just go with it. I'm going to come off screen.
Right, I'll start with you then, Lottie.
Just me and you.
So first of all, what does inclusion mean to you?
Oh my god, what a question. I think it means to me kind of in loads of aspects, but in terms of education, having an inclusive outlook on how you run your school as staff members and how you incorporate your students into that anything that is inclusive as possible is going to create the best system as possible. So, you know, my hopes for the future is that when we're running schools, we're talking to young people and asking what they feel, what they want, and actually taking those opinions into consideration to make a school that is as inclusive as possible. You still there?
Sorry, it's lagging a bit.
Oh no, okay.
And from my perspective, I would say that inclusively looking into education, we want education where the curriculum and the wider curriculum, so any sort.
Ooh.
Sorry, I cut out for a second there.
Yeah.
My back.
Yes, okay. You are. I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna have to freestyle for a minute. Okay. Carry on.
So everything that we're doing in school is able to embrace the identities, backgrounds of every single student and give them ample knowledge of differing identities. So we're talking ethnic minorities, if you will, SEND, LGBT, whole shebang. Yeah. So starting off, I want to talk about pre-lockdown. So before lockdown started, when you were still in school and going to school, to what extent do you think your curriculum was actually inclusive, thinking of every student, including yourself?
Not at all, really. I think I'm sure we'll come on to it in a minute. It's changed a lot now, but before lockdown, I think there was it was a very Eurocentric kind of curriculum to start with, which I think has become very clear in the past few months. Any history that we've been taught, I take sociology, even the sociology curriculum, there have been many subjects which I'm now looking back thinking, what on earth happened? How does this go underlooked, basically? And another one is LGBT education. I think if I went back to my year 11 English class and when just any lesson actually went hands up, who knows about the Stonewall riot? There's probably about 2 people who would put their hands up knowing what they were, which I think is a real problem because that is something that really shaped LGBT history and shaped, you know, history in general. Like, it was a big thing for activists and it created a lot of change. So those are 2 points which kind of like really stuck out to me that like before lockdown have been awfully handled. In terms of class as well, I think that's another problem. I think we're learning history from, again, we're learning people like, I can't think of an example, like Christopher Columbus. This is very random, who is a very, you know, he was very high class figure, very wealthy. We learn a lot about the monarchy. we're not hearing about people who maybe have been at the bottom of the class system and who have been revolutionising, you know, our way of life today. But yeah, that was a ramble of like loads of rubbish, but hopefully that made sense.
No, I think something that stood out to me about what you were saying, if you had gone back and asked about LGBT and the Stonewall riots, know what only a couple of people would have known. And that led me to think about like my experience, and I was quite lucky. I had quite a bit of LGBT inclusion at my school, but that also makes me think about whether inclusion does differ a lot depending on where you are, and why is that the case? Like, I feel like that's something that we need to challenge, because I think within my school there was a lot of pressure from students who are from the LGBT community to have a bit more inclusion, and that's why we got it. But that shouldn't be the case. It should be something that's just there for every student, so that they don't have to feel as if they have to fight to get their identity heard, no matter what their identity may be.
Yeah, totally.
Has someone else joined?
I think so.
Can they unmute? Can you unmute?
Yeah. Are you here?
Oh my days! Sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't even realize that I was in here. Sorry, guys. Okay, I'm here. All right. You can start. All right. Sorry, guys. All right. Okay, I'm here. I'm ready.
So I just asked Lottie this question as well. So for you, thinking about pre-lockdown when you were in school, and when you were in school, how inclusive do you think your curriculum was?
So in regards, so I'm obviously in sixth form, so I don't work as much with my secondary school as well, because I'm an external to my sixth form. But I feel like the things that my school has in operation does quite unify and include a lot of people. So from what I know from my friends who were internals in my school, form groups were really close. Like, that's how you basically made your friends at the start of the year, and you have lessons together, and most of your teachers would be together. So you formed that bond from early on. So everyone was included in some way, because in a form group there might be 5 different groups, but everyone will be in a group. And I feel like it's then the responsibility of that form tutor to know that, okay, someone is looking left out, we're going to do something about it. And if someone was getting bullied, for instance, from what my friends told me, in like extreme cases where there was bullying, they took people out of the form group and moved them on. And these form groups are like kept the same from year 7 all the way to year 11, I believe. So it's like you build, because it's an only girls school that my sixth form's at, you build a sisterhood throughout the whole year. And then they also work with the Princess Diana Trust, and I'm part of that for sixth form. I think I'm doing it next year, like I'm running it for the whole school next year. And it's the anti-bullying ambassadors with Princess Diana Trust. So it's another thing where if you feel like you're getting bullied, or you're not what's it called, you're not feeling included in some way, you can always talk to one of the ambassadors, and they can help you, because the ambassadors get trained by the Princess Diana Trust as well. We also, in my school, there was also a peer mentorship program that I was part of. So it was teachers informing us that if teachers had like issues with specific like people, they could bring them to year 13s and year 12s, and they would have like a mentorship with them. And I completed mine for 8 weeks, and I started off with a girl who was on the 8-week report, and then when we finished, she was off report. And it's things like that my school lets you be included with. And I'm not saying they're at the top yet. I don't think they're ready. I think there's still a long way to go. But I feel like if institutions have these little things in place, then inclusion is so easy to pick up on, because I feel like the fact that they keep the form groups consistent from year 7 to year 11 is a big benefit, because it identifies issues very quickly. That form tutor will know if something is not right and stuff like that. Yeah, so that's mainly what I have to say on that. Sorry about the lateness.
Don't be sorry. I really like I really like how you talked about the idea of kind of forming this bond within like form groups and stuff. So that's not something I'd thought about before. Like that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, same.
So moving on to our next question, just because I'm conscious of time. So during lockdown, we've seen a huge range of issues being faced by students, whether that be mental health, financial issues, access to online learning, like all these different issues. How do you think the government and schools have dealt with the diverse circumstances and trying to ensure equity in education through the pandemic? So, like, what are your opinions on that? Yeah, Lottie, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think it's been a massively classist issue in terms of, I think we were discussing in a meeting a few weeks ago about access to internet, access to laptops, access to phones, like anything that you can view your online lesson on, or a PowerPoint or whatever. I think that was a really, really large issue. And again, even if you have got access to those things, you might be in a family of 4 or 5 who all need to use that laptop at some point. I think that was a big thing that they said that they were going to handle, but I still know of people who have suffered greatly. So I don't think that's good. And as well as this, the government could have kind of released guidance of a set standard that all schools had to follow for their online lessons. So we wouldn't have had the issue of some schools like mine, for example. I've been sent a PowerPoint and it's been like, off you go, have fun. Whereas they could have been doing online lessons and engaging better with their students, which I know of a lot of schools have done. So I think having that set standard there would have meant that we were all on a bit more of a even playing field, as even as you can be when people's circumstances are so different in this time.
So I completely agree with Lottie in regards to resources and stuff like that. And like I said when I was talking about the other question, my school's not there yet, because I know like a sixth form college around my area, my friend, she didn't want to do her schoolwork. I'm just putting it out there. So she lied and said, I don't have a laptop. So what they actually did is they got one of the school's laptop, put it in the cab, and literally drove to her house and delivered her a laptop. But that school is literally an independent sixth form. There's no secondary school attached to it, no primary school. So they obviously have those extra resources and abilities to do that. But whereas I go to a co-educational sixth form, so that means I go to a sixth form, obviously, but it's with 2 secondary schools, and they're both, they're different sexes. So I have a boys' school at the bottom of the hill and a girls' school at the bottom of the hill. We go to both schools basically. So they don't have the resources to do that necessarily. Like, they have laptops, but they can't trust us to bring it home, and like my school's not very like close to where I live as well, so they can't do that. And where my school lacked in including and considering all what's it called, type of people, I would say my school's in a very rich area and is in a predominantly white area and stuff like that, which is fine during school anyways, because there's a school bus that drives us straight there, so you don't really feel it, like it's not that deep. But when coronavirus hit, we had like a few weeks of online learning, and what happens in year 12 traditionally, and it has happened consistently in many schools, is that you have your 12 marks, and they're very important because they determine your predicted grades. Like, instead of my school doing what every other normal school did, which was cancel the mocks and wait for us to resume in September, they said, no, you lot are doing your mocks in June. So when you stopped revising because you thought, oh, we'll have mocks in September, we were told 3 weeks or 2 weeks in with notice to start revising. So we had to revise. So people obviously had to use resources they may not have had. Now, my issue for me was that I knew people whose parents don't necessarily drive, and the school bus wasn't operating at that time. So what's it called, how do you expect me to get to where I'm going? Like, from my house without driving and all of that, I basically take 2 buses, but it's not 2 buses that are frequent. Like, the first bus is frequent, but the other one, like, if you miss it, you're waiting for 22 minutes. Like, that's not a bus you want to miss. Like, so they didn't consider that people actually have to go on the bus, and like, the lockdown restrictions hadn't eased anyway, so it's like I'm actually going on the bus when the coronavirus is really out here in these streets. So they didn't consider that, okay, some people's parents don't drive, and like I think they thought it was fake, and then people wouldn't show up, so then they were like, okay, we're gonna deliver it to your house, but they're obviously gonna cheat, and they did. So you got a half of them cheating at home because they can't get to school when some of them actually could. Some of them struggling to get to school just so they can sit mocks that they could have really done in September, because it's not like the government said they must do their mocks. So they didn't include, and they didn't consider people's different demographics and stuff like that. So I feel like schools during this coronavirus, as much as it came to everyone as a shock, they should have worked out things so much differently. But yeah, that's what I have to say about that question.
I completely agree with what you've said. I think that's the case for a lot of people. Because of time, I'm gonna have to wrap things up with one more question to finish it off. There was more to say, but sadly we're running out of time. So if you could, in like one sentence, sum up an action that you think either teachers or students could take to make sure school as a whole is more inclusive, what would it be?
I think listening to each other is like whoever, if that's teachers listening to their students, if that's students listening to their teachers, if that's the government listening to everyone. I think without, which we're not seeing at the moment, and without that like listening, we're going to have a one-track minded curriculum that is focusing on the most higher class white male, you know, of us. So yeah.
And for me, I feel like we should have like awareness events, because in a panel today we've talked about the environment, we've talked about race, we've talked about how like promoting and stimulating inclusion. So I feel like if we have events frequently throughout the year, even during Pride Month as well. So in October it's Black History Month, so that could be an event that is compulsory in every single school. And then I know Enoch, some acts of kindness be celebrated throughout every single school in the UK. And the same thing when we get to Pride Month is in the summer. We should celebrate that. All of these different things that happen, but it's not compulsory, they should become compulsory, because that's how we all learn. And when you do events in school, traditionally it's fun. You're gonna want to know, you're gonna want to learn, and it just stimulates awareness. And that's how people get included, not by teaching on a PowerPoint Martin Luther King or what's it called, LGBTQ plus a community was oppressed for this blah 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 years. No, let's make it proactive, let's do events and let's stimulate awareness. That's how everyone can get included. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely love what you said. Just to wrap it up, I'm going to say that if it were me, it's something that needs to be implemented into everyday life in school, not just one-off lessons, one-off events. It has to be throughout education as a whole. Inclusion is very important. Now I'm going to hand back over to Elia.
That was amazing. I'm so sorry. I'm having issues basically because my laptop, like I can't hear the audio. So I'm on Zoom on my phone. So the commitment right now is unreal. But honestly, that was a really good way to like sum up all the panels. So again, I'm going to do what I do best and somehow make you guys go off of the screen. I'm still learning as I do it. So bear with me and like watch my concentration face as I'm like getting you off the screen. But thank you so much. And I'm so sorry, Bumi, for chucking you in there in the deep end.
No worries.
Last minute, but yeah, you did amazingly. So did you, Lottie, and obviously, of course, Dylan hosted that amazingly. So, gonna make you go to become an attendee. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Thank you so much. And time check. It is past, and we did say we were going to finish at past. But there are a few more things that I feel like is really, really important to touch on. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Feel free to leave if you want to leave. We are recording the end and we will share it. But I'd like to share my screen quickly. Can people comment? Can you see the screen right now? Like comment below if you can see, just so make sure. Let's double check the chat. Yes, okay, cool. Everyone can see it. So today was amazing. It was a big student call up, part 2. The first one was incredible, and this one I think is just literally blown it through the roof. And we have discussed so many different areas. So as you can see, we spoke about mental health, we spoke about like the environment and sustainability, we spoke about class, colour and culture, which was a very, very interesting discussion. And I kind of wanted to touch on youth activism on a pandemic, which unfortunately we can't today, so we can go into that way more. But I wanted to show you a video that was created by a young person, a part of Pupil Power. If for some reason you can't hear the audio, again, please comment. There's no audio now, but when you see people's faces, there should be audio. So let me know if you can hear it. Yeah, it's not there now at the moment, so. Can you guys hear audio? No audio. Okay. Well, we will save this video. I'll pause it there. We will save it for another time because it is an amazing video by Pupil Power member Ollie, who spent so much time working on that. So shout out to Ollie for that. And so let me just move the slide. So my question for everybody, all the panelists, all the hosts, and all the attendees today is, what is your vision for transformation within the education system for the 21st century? What is it? It's such a big question, and all the work that Pupil Power does and tries to advocate for is about trying to encourage young people and adults to push themselves to imagine, because you're stuck in a system Monday to Friday, and I don't blame people for not being able to kind of see the flaws within a system. And that's why I think Pupil Power and other organisations that are focusing on youth activism and that focusing on this idea of transforming the education system has grown massively within this pandemic, because we're outside of school, we're outside of work, Monday to Friday now we're at home, and we're now in a position where we can realise these flaws, which when you're wrapped up in a system, you just unfortunately can't see. So this sort of, the panels that we discussed today, I think brought out and unpicked so many of the issues within the systems. And I feel really, really, really lucky that we were able to get as many young people as we did today, representing Pupil Power and other youth organisations, to speak on these issues, because it's not spoken about enough. And I'm not going to sit here and say that it is, because it honestly isn't. So I'm really proud to have had everybody here today, and I'm so, so thankful for everybody's honesty, for the truth, and for the power that everybody spoke. So thank you from me to everybody else, and I'm sure people in the comments that were attendees would support me in saying that everyone did amazingly. And I just want to say, for all of our adult allies that are here today that are listening, I'm really glad that we got to invite you, because the last Pupil Power event was strictly for young people, and when we were organising that, we were like, no, we need just a space for young people, because when we're in spaces, it's often we find adults draining out our voices with their own voices, and there's never those chances for us to really speak up and speak our truth. So Pupil Power, it was really important for us to have a space just for young people. And now when we're thinking about this idea of school post lockdown, and this idea of what the school landscape is going to look like when we return in September, I think it's really important that after all these Zoom calls, after all these meetings, all the work Pupil Power has been doing and other organisations and young people have been doing, that we connect with the adults, we connect with the educators, the teachers and our school leaders to work together and collaborate, because this idea of a transformation that we admire and we really kind of have in our minds will not be possible alone, and it will take us a very long time. So collaborating with the adults that are also doing the work is really, really, really important. So have a think of that question, tweet us, Instagram us, you guys know all our socials at the Pupil Power, and let us know your answer to that question. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Phoenix Education and Freedom to Learn, and also the Changemakers Lab, which is in association with Phoenix Education, and shout out to Sophie, and so many other people are part of those two organisations who have not only inspired me to continue doing the work that I've been doing in lockdown, but also basically giving me the chance to lead this event and run this event under their wing. As you probably, for those that were right at the beginning, there are so many other events for young people and people who want to just create change within the education system to go and connect to and join. So of course I'll be giving all those details on the email that will get sent to you after this event. but we'll also be plugging them on all our socials as always. So stay connected on there. There are a list of so many other events that you can go to. And this is basically the launch of Freedoms to Learn's series of events. So this is us basically kickstarting it, and I would definitely have to say, I know it sounds a bit biased, we did amazingly, and I just think it was a great way to launch all the events. So young people out there, you're saying that you want to lead change, you say that you want to be in these spaces, please go and check out those events and sign up and just basically be there, and I can't wait to see you all there as well. As I said, find our socials. These are our socials. I think if you're here already, you're already connected with us, so you already know. But just for me personally, thank you so much to absolutely everybody that is listening right now, wherever you are. And I just want to add in, like, people who are on our panel are literally representing from all corners of the country. And also shout out to Lottie. I saw that she had a Pupil Power t-shirt on as well, and she's in Southampton, just to shout it out there. So yeah, honestly, appreciate you all. If you've taken any pictures, feel free to basically post that and, you know, tag us, #Pupil Power, #Big Student Call Up, do all of that good stuff. And yeah, I can't wait for more events like this. Just basically keep doing what you're doing, keep going into these sort of spaces to lead change and push for it, because it's not hard. And I hope that today, listening to those young people and the panels have inspired you in some way, shape or form to go out there and, you know, be the change makers that you need to be, because our education system needs us, guys. They really do need us. So I'm going to stop waffling. Thank you so much to all of you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, however you do that. Yeah. So thank you all so much. I'm going to stop recording.